The moment was tense, almost painfully so. The lights of the studio cast a warm glow across the set, but that warmth did nothing to dispel the chill that seemed to hang over Prince Harry as he sat across from Hasan Minhaj. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates on paper. The scenario should have been straightforward. A high-profile interview where a public figure opens up about personal struggles, revealing layers of vulnerability in front of an attentive, charismatic host. But in reality, what unfolded was anything but ordinary. From the moment Harry appeared on camera, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation, but also thick with discomfort. A mixture of curiosity and unspoken judgment that the audience, both in the studio and online, could feel immediately. Hasan Minhaj, a man renowned for his ability to blend sharp political satire with comedic timing, approached the interview with his signature style, balancing empathy with incisive humor. His reputation was built on pulling back the curtain on celebrity and political figures alike, forcing them to confront truths they might rather sidestep, and Harry, a member of one of the most scrutinized families in the world, was about to find out just how carefully crafted public personas can unravel under the spotlight. There was an unmistakable sense that this would not be a typical royal interview, and as the cameras rolled, Harry's expression betrayed a mix of nervous anticipation and the faintest hint of dread. His palms were slightly sweaty, a subtle sign of his discomfort, a physiological detail that humanized him instantly. For all the headlines, the documentaries, and the public statements, this moment was raw, unfiltered, and unapologetically exposing. The conversation began cautiously, almost tentatively, with Hasan addressing the elephant in the room, Harry's memoir, Spare. The book, lauded in some circles for its candidness and criticized in others for perceived oversharing, had already fueled debates across media platforms worldwide. The narrative within Spare was one of vulnerability and resilience, a window into Harry's internal battles, childhood memories, and the intense pressures of growing up in the royal spotlight. Hasan's first question cut directly to this theme. He asked about the emotional trauma Harry had endured, setting the stage for a serious exploration of his experiences. In that moment, there was a pause, a brief silence in which the weight of what Harry had lived through seemed to settle over the room. For anyone observing closely, it was clear that this was more than just a promotional appearance. It was a confrontation with past pain, delivered in a space where humor and human empathy coexisted uneasily. Harry's response was measured at first, his voice calm but tinged with the vulnerability that had become a hallmark of his public appearances in recent years. He spoke about the scrutiny, the relentless media attention, and the emotional toll of feeling trapped between public expectation and personal desire. His words were carefully chosen, resonating with a quiet intensity that drew listeners in. Hasan listened intently, nodding occasionally, acknowledging Harry's candor. But as the discussion deepened, an unexpected pivot arrived, a twist that no one could have anticipated. Hasan, in his unique style, introduced a humorous aside that referenced Harry's discussion in Spare about shopping at discount stores, specifically mentioning TK Maxx. The comment landed with a precision that was equal parts comedic and humiliating. Suddenly, the mood shifted. The weight of vulnerability collided with the levity of ridicule, creating a tense, awkward moment that seemed to stretch infinitely. For Harry, the transition from serious discussion to playful mockery was jarring. The flush in his cheeks, the slight hesitation in his response, and the visible discomfort painted a picture of a man caught off guard, struggling to navigate the unexpected turn in tone. What followed was a series of micro-expressions, subtle but revealing. Observers noted Harry's eyes darting briefly, a small but telling sign of anxiety. He laughed awkwardly, not entirely at the joke, but at the social expectation to do so, an instinctive reaction to mask discomfort. The juxtaposition of the sensitive subject matter with a sudden comedic jab created a dynamic that was at once compelling and cringe-inducing. It was a delicate balancing act, Harry's willingness to share his story versus the inherent risk of public humiliation, made more acute by the medium of live discussion. Hasan, ever the skilled host, walked the tightrope between empathy and satire with practiced ease, his commentary a mix of insight, humor, and provocation. It was this mixture that created the viral potential of the moment. Viewers could not look away, simultaneously sympathizing with Harry while also absorbing the entertainment value of his visible unease. To understand the significance of this episode, one must consider Harry's trajectory over the past decade. From his early life under the intense gaze of the royal family and the media, to the tragic loss of his mother, Princess Diana, Harry's life had been punctuated by profound personal loss and relentless public scrutiny. These experiences shaped not only his character but also his approach to public appearances. Whereas earlier generations of royals maintained stoicism in the face of adversity, Harry's openness represented a generational shift, one where vulnerability was increasingly visible, even celebrated. Yet, visibility comes with risk. In a setting designed for entertainment, emotional openness can become a double-edged sword. Hasan's reference to TK Maxx was emblematic of this tension. As the conversation began, Hasan eased into it with a warm, yet deliberate tone. He opened by acknowledging Harry's memoir, Spare, the narrative that had captured worldwide attention and polarized opinion. Hasan's approach was careful. He wanted to create space for Harry to share openly, yet he also aimed to maintain a dynamic that could pivot at any moment. Harry responded cautiously, his voice calm but layered with emotion. He spoke of his experiences growing up in the royal family, the media scrutiny, and the personal losses that had shaped his worldview. Each sentence was measured, but behind the careful cadence, a subtle tension built. The room seemed to contract with the weight of his words, as if every observer, live audience, camera crew, and viewers at home, were collectively holding their breath. Then came the pivot. Hasan, with his signature sharpness, transitioned from the weight of trauma to the humorous detail of Harry's TK Maxx anecdote. The shift was abrupt, yet expertly timed. The joke landed, not harshly, but pointedly, highlighting the peculiar contrast between royal gravitas and the mundane act of shopping at a discount store. Harry's response was immediate but restrained. A nervous laugh, a subtle shift in posture, a slight reddening of his face. It was in these micro-expressions that the story truly unfolded. Here was a man, a prince with an entire global persona built around composure, now visibly negotiating the collision between personal vulnerability and public perception. This moment, small yet telling, sparked a wave of analysis among viewers and commentators. Social media erupted almost instantly, dissecting every frame for clues about Harry's emotional state. Some praised his courage, noting that laughing at one's own vulnerabilities in a high-pressure setting is no small feat. Others focused on the humor itself, amplifying the joke, making memes, and sharing clips that emphasized the awkwardness. What became clear was that this interaction was not just entertainment. It was a cultural touchpoint. It illuminated the precarious balance of being a public figure in the age of instantaneous media commentary, where every gesture is scrutinized, every reaction dissected, and every emotional display either celebrated or mocked. Beyond the surface, the chapter of arrival and atmosphere highlighted the meticulous choreography of public appearances. Every element of the interview, from lighting to seating, from camera angles to verbal cues, was designed to maximize both narrative tension and audience engagement. Harry's emotional responses, whether conscious or subconscious, were amplified by the environment. The studio itself became a character in the unfolding story, a space of observation, performance, and psychological interplay. The audience, both present and virtual, became participants in this performance, their reactions shaping the perception of the encounter in real time. Psychologically, the experience also underscored the challenges of navigating vulnerability in public spaces. Harry's memoir had already revealed personal trauma to a global audience, yet the live interview brought a new dimension. Here, vulnerability was immediate, reactive, and inseparable from performance. The laughter triggered by Hasan's joke was not merely humorous. It was a social mirror reflecting Harry's internal navigation of embarrassment, composure, and self-presentation. For viewers, the unfolding microdynamics provided a rare window into the human consequences of public scrutiny, revealing that emotional resilience is as much about internal fortitude as it is about managing external perceptions. The chapter also set the stage for a broader examination of celebrity culture in the digital age. The rapid dissemination of clips, memes, and commentary demonstrated the speed at which personal moments are transformed into public spectacle. Harry's experience was emblematic of a modern phenomenon, the collision of personal narrative, humor, and global audience engagement. Each gesture, each laugh, each pause becomes fodder for conversation, judgment, or empathy, creating a digital echo chamber in which the nuances of emotion are amplified and reshaped. Hasan's role as host exemplified this dual responsibility, to honor the guest's vulnerability while navigating the entertainment imperatives of the format. By the time the first chapter drew to a close, viewers were fully immersed in the tension of arrival and atmosphere. The scene had been carefully established. Harry's presence, the subtle cues of discomfort, Hasan's nuanced hosting, and the anticipation of what would unfold. The audience had been drawn into a layered narrative, one that combined the gravity of personal trauma with the unpredictability of humor and public perception. Every detail, the physical environment, the host's approach, the guest's micro-expressions, served to create a rich, emotionally compelling opening to the deeper exploration of the interview. The arrival and atmosphere were not merely a prelude. They were the foundation upon which the subsequent chapters would build. Understanding the physical, emotional, and social context of this moment is essential to fully grasp the complexity of the interaction. It was a delicate interplay of preparation, expectation, and real-time response, offering viewers a vivid illustration of the pressures and nuances of public life. More importantly, it set the stage for the emotional journey that would follow, a journey marked by vulnerability, humor, and the intricate dance between private experience and public scrutiny. The moment Hasan Minhaj officially began the interview, a new layer of tension entered the room. The cameras were rolling, lights focused, and the audience, both in studio and online, was acutely aware that they were about to witness a rare glimpse of Prince Harry's unfiltered emotions. For someone so accustomed to media scrutiny, this was more than just a conversation. It was a test of emotional resilience. Harry's hands rested on his knees, fingers interlaced, a subtle attempt to anchor himself amid the mounting pressure. His breathing, though measured, carried a slight edge, revealing the anticipation and stress of the moment. The very act of being present in this setting was a confrontation with vulnerability, amplified by the knowledge that every gesture, pause, and expression could be dissected by millions. Hasan opened with a gentle acknowledgement of the memoir, Spare, creating a bridge between Harry's deeply personal reflections and the public's insatiable curiosity. The host's tone was empathetic yet deliberate, framing the conversation as an exploration of emotional experiences rather than sensationalized gossip. Harry, in turn, responded with a combination of guarded openness and careful articulation. He recounted the pressures of growing up in the royal spotlight, the constant scrutiny, and the complexities of family dynamics. His voice, while steady, carried an undertone of fatigue, a subtle testament to years of managing public perception while processing personal grief. These early moments were crucial, not for their entertainment value, but for setting the emotional baseline of the interview. They allowed the audience to understand the stakes. This was not merely an exchange of words, but an intimate look into the human side of royalty. The conversation soon delved into the trauma Harry had experienced over the years. Hasan asked pointed questions about the emotional impact of media intrusion, familial tension, and the personal losses that shaped him. Harry's responses were measured, yet the audience could detect the subtle tremor in his tone when discussing particularly painful moments. His eyes, which flickered with emotion, occasionally dropped to the floor, revealing the weight of his memories. These micro-expressions were telling. They conveyed more about Harry's state of mind than any words could. Hasan, experienced in reading such cues, allowed moments of silence to linger, giving Harry space to process and share. This deliberate pacing heightened the emotional resonance of the interview, allowing viewers to feel the gravity of the experiences being described. Amidst the candid discussion, Hasan introduced humor, carefully weaving it into the narrative to maintain audience engagement without undermining the seriousness of the topic. The pivot to the TK Maxx joke, referencing Harry's anecdote about shopping for discount clothing, was subtle yet impactful. The room's energy shifted instantly. What had been a deeply reflective conversation was punctuated with levity, creating a moment that was simultaneously entertaining and discomforting. Harry's reaction was immediate but controlled. A nervous laugh, a brief flush across his cheeks, and a visible attempt to maintain composure. The humor was not mean-spirited, yet it highlighted the delicate balance between authenticity and social performance. Here was a man, stripped of his royal armor in a private conversation, suddenly reminded of the public's gaze in a very real, very tangible way. The juxtaposition of vulnerability and humor in this moment provided a striking lesson in emotional dynamics. It illustrated how public figures navigate complex social cues, balancing the need to appear composed with the authenticity of their emotions. Harry's discomfort was palpable, yet it was coupled with an underlying resilience. He maintained eye contact, responded thoughtfully, and allowed the conversation to continue without deflection. This ability to navigate simultaneous vulnerability and scrutiny exemplified the modern challenges faced by high-profile individuals. It also revealed a rarely seen aspect of Harry's personality, his capacity for emotional regulation under pressure. Throughout the interview, the role of the audience, both in studio and online, cannot be understated. Each reaction, whether subtle applause, laughter, or silence, served as a feedback mechanism, influencing the rhythm and flow of the conversation. The audience became participants in the unfolding narrative, their presence shaping the interaction in real time. For Harry, this dynamic introduced additional layers of pressure, requiring constant adjustment of tone, expression, and pacing. The experience was a masterclass in real-time social navigation, highlighting the extraordinary skill required to manage both internal emotional states and external perceptions simultaneously. As the conversation progressed, Hasan skillfully alternated between serious inquiry and light-hearted commentary. He probed deeper into Harry's emotional landscape, asking about moments of self-doubt, feelings of isolation, and the coping mechanisms employed throughout his life. Harry responded with candor, sharing insights into his thought processes, reflections on past decisions, and the lessons learned from navigating intense public scrutiny. Each revelation was punctuated with subtle emotional cues, the tightening of his jaw, the flicker of a smile, or the slight shift in posture, providing the audience with a richer, more nuanced understanding of his experiences. The narrative of the interview evolved organically, blending storytelling, humor, and psychological insight into a compelling whole. One of the most striking aspects of the interview was the raw honesty Harry displayed in discussing his fears and insecurities. Unlike traditional media appearances, where carefully curated messages dominate, this setting allowed for vulnerability to emerge naturally. Harry spoke openly about the pressures of living up to public expectations, the impact of constant media scrutiny on mental health, and the challenges of forging an independent identity within a historically rigid institution. The honesty was palpable, resonating deeply with viewers who recognized the universality of these emotions, even in someone living a life far removed from their own. Hasan's approach, blending empathy with incisive humor, provided a framework for this vulnerability to surface while maintaining viewer engagement. His references, including the playful jab at Harry's discount shopping, created a rhythm that oscillated between reflection and levity. This rhythm mirrored real-life conversations, where humor often serves as a coping mechanism, easing tension while allowing deeper truths to be acknowledged. The interaction was a study in human dynamics, demonstrating how moments of discomfort, when navigated thoughtfully, can lead to authentic engagement and connection. By the end of this chapter, the foundations for understanding Harry's emotional landscape were firmly established. Viewers had witnessed the beginning of an intimate journey, one where vulnerability, humor, and public scrutiny intersected in ways that were simultaneously entertaining and illuminating. The chapter captured the delicate balance Harry maintained between openness and self-protection, providing insight into the psychological complexities of being a public figure in the modern era. It also set the stage for deeper analysis, where subsequent sections would explore the most memorable moments, public reactions, and broader cultural implications of the interview. The first moments of the interview, though appearing simple on the surface, contained layers of meaning and consequence. Harry's visible discomfort, Hasan's skillful hosting, and the audience's presence all contributed to a multifaceted narrative. The chapter highlighted how small gestures, micro-expressions, and subtle shifts in tone can convey profound truths about human emotion, resilience, and social performance. It was a reminder that even in the highly curated world of celebrity, authentic emotional expression remains powerful and compelling. The room had shifted in energy almost imperceptibly, yet the change was undeniable. For several minutes, Prince Harry had been recounting the experiences detailed in his memoir, Spare, painting vivid portraits of childhood pressures, familial tension, and the relentless glare of public scrutiny. The audience had been drawn into the gravity of his words, the vulnerability on display creating an almost tangible tension. But then, Hasan Minhaj made the pivot, light, humorous, and pointed, a comment referencing Harry's shopping experiences at TK Maxx. It was a seemingly innocuous remark on the surface, a gentle tease about discount shopping habits. However, the context amplified its impact. To an ordinary viewer, shopping at a discount store might seem mundane, even relatable. But in the world of royalty, where opulence and curated public perception dominate, the anecdote became an unexpected tool for humor. Hasan's delivery was precise, balancing levity with timing that accentuated the awkwardness of the moment. He did not ridicule Harry maliciously. Instead, he highlighted a contrast between the ordinary experiences shared in Spare and the elevated expectations of public life. Yet the effect on Harry was immediate and undeniable. Harry's response was subtle but revealing. He laughed nervously, a short, clipped sound that suggested both amusement and discomfort. His fingers twitched slightly, a micro-expression of tension, while his eyes flicked briefly away from the host, an instinctive response to a moment that had caught him off guard. The flush across his face, barely perceptible to the casual viewer but obvious to those analyzing body language, added to the visual tension. Here was a man who had lived under constant public attention, suddenly confronted with a humorous spotlight on a detail of his personal life that he had never expected to become a focal point for mockery. This intersection of humor and humiliation served a dual purpose. On one level, it humanized Harry, reminding viewers that even those born into privilege experience ordinary moments of self-consciousness. On another, it amplified the inherent vulnerability of being a public figure. Every laugh, every awkward pause, every slight adjustment in posture became fodder for interpretation. The audience could sense the discomfort, empathize with the tension, and yet, paradoxically, engage with the levity of the moment. Hasan had orchestrated a perfect storm. He created a moment that was entertaining, revealing, and emotionally complex all at once. The significance of this moment went beyond simple embarrassment. It illuminated the delicate balance Harry maintained between sharing personal truths and managing public perception. Every revelation in Spare, from the deeply emotional to the surprisingly mundane, was now subject to scrutiny. The TK Maxx joke, while minor in content, became major in impact because it exposed the vulnerabilities inherent in disclosing personal life details in a public forum. Harry's reaction, a mix of humor, tension, and restraint, was a masterclass in emotional regulation. He was negotiating a social tightrope, aware that any misstep could be magnified by both traditional and social media. Observers analyzing the segment noted the microdynamics at play. Harry's laughter was not wholly spontaneous. It carried the calculated cadence of someone managing public perception while navigating genuine discomfort. His subtle physical cues, twitching fingers, shifting posture, and the brief redness in his face, added layers of meaning beyond the words themselves. These expressions communicated tension, surprise, and the vulnerability of a man used to controlling narratives suddenly placed in a setting where spontaneity and humor dictated the flow. Hasan's comedy was surgical. It revealed truths without aggression, teasing without malice, exposing without cruelty. The audience's reaction mirrored this duality. Online, social media erupted almost instantly. Clips of Harry's reaction were shared widely, generating memes, commentary, and analysis. Some viewers praised his poise and courage, noting that maintaining composure while being teased in real time is no small feat. Others focused on the humor itself, amplifying the joke and highlighting the awkwardness. This rapid dissemination underscored the power of modern media. Moments of vulnerability, especially those juxtaposed with humor, can become globally recognized and dissected within minutes. In this environment, the stakes for emotional expression are extraordinarily high. Harry's discomfort was not simply a matter of personal pride. It was a reflection of decades spent managing public perception. Every gesture, every expression, every laugh could be amplified, recontextualized, or turned into fodder for global discussion. The TK Maxx moment, minor in content, became a case study in the fragility of public persona. It highlighted the delicate interplay between authenticity and performance, between vulnerability and self-protection. For Harry, Navigating this dynamic required a level of psychological insight and emotional intelligence that few viewers could fully appreciate in real time. Yet, within the tension, there was also a profound humanity. The moment reminded audiences that even the most scrutinized public figures are subject to the same discomforts, insecurities, and social anxieties as anyone else. It created a bridge between royalty and ordinary people, a connection forged not through shared wealth or status, but through shared human experience. The juxtaposition of high-profile vulnerability with everyday humor offered a compelling lens through which viewers could relate, empathize, and reflect on their own responses to embarrassment and social scrutiny. From a narrative perspective, the TK Maxx joke served as a pivot point in the interview. It shifted the energy from reflective vulnerability to a lighter, more playful tone, creating an emotional oscillation that kept viewers engaged. The technical execution of this segment was equally important. Camera angles subtly captured Harry's reactions, emphasizing micro-expressions and physical cues that conveyed the full impact of the joke. Close-ups on his face, slow pans capturing subtle body movements, and timing that allowed the audience to process the interplay of humor and discomfort all contributed to the emotional resonance of the moment. These choices transformed what might have been a simple comedic aside into a multilayered narrative, rich in psychological and social insight. The aftermath of the joke further underscored its significance. Harry, visibly collecting himself, transitioned smoothly back into the more serious themes of the memoir. This recovery demonstrated resilience, self-awareness, and the ability to maintain composure under pressure. It also reinforced the dual nature of the interview. An interplay of vulnerability and humor, authenticity and performance, tension and release. Viewers were not just witnessing a moment of mild embarrassment. They were observing the navigation of complex emotional terrain, a live demonstration of the human capacity for adaptation, self-regulation, and public engagement. By the end of this chapter, the TK Maxx moment had become more than a punchline. It was a lens through which the audience could understand the broader narrative of Prince Harry's public and private experiences. It highlighted the intricate dance between disclosure and perception, vulnerability and performance, humor and humility. The audience, now fully engaged, had a deeper appreciation for the emotional stakes involved, the skill required to manage them, and the humanity underlying every public gesture. This moment also foreshadowed subsequent tensions and revelations in the interview. It established a pattern: serious reflection punctuated by humor, emotional exposure met with levity, and the constant negotiation of public perception. It became clear that every subsequent anecdote, every response, and every micro-expression would carry amplified meaning, interpreted both in the studio and across a global audience. The TK Maxx joke, simple on the surface, laid the groundwork for a multi-layered exploration of vulnerability, resilience, and the pressures of modern celebrity life. From the moment Hasan Minhaj uttered the TK Maxx reference, Prince Harry's physical demeanor became a window into his emotional state. Viewers watching closely could see the subtle, almost imperceptible cues that betrayed his internal discomfort. His palms, lightly resting on his knees, were no longer fully relaxed. Slight movements suggested a subconscious effort to release tension. Harry's breathing, previously steady, exhibited minor irregularities, a fleeting increase in pace that spoke volumes about his heightened stress response. These are the kinds of physiological reactions that occur when a person is confronted with a sudden shift in social dynamics, particularly when humor intersects with personal vulnerability under the gaze of a global audience. The human body has a remarkable ability to convey emotion even when words attempt to mask it. In Harry's case, this phenomenon was on full display. Micro-expressions flickered across his face, imperceptible to a casual observer but vivid to those trained to notice subtle signals. The tightness around his jawline, a slight upward twitch of his eyebrows, and the brief, fleeting redness in his cheeks were not random. They were involuntary signals of tension, discomfort, and the cognitive processing required to maintain composure. In high-pressure situations, These microreactions become a natural mechanism for managing stress, signaling both internal conflict and the effort to align emotional reality with social expectations. Sweating, the most visible of these physical cues, became a central focus in the room. As Harry acknowledged his own nervousness, admitting that he was sweating, the statement functioned on multiple levels. It was a verbal acknowledgement of discomfort, a gesture of transparency to the host and audience, and an admission that, despite years of training in public poise, he was still human. The audience could see the perspiration on his forehead, the subtle dampening at the back of his neck, and the slight sheen on his temples, a visual confirmation of the psychological and emotional strain he was experiencing. These signs were compelling precisely because they humanized a figure often idealized or reduced to media caricature. Here was a man navigating the collision of private vulnerability and public scrutiny, and his body language told a story words alone could not convey. The phenomenon of visible stress in public figures is well documented in psychological literature. Sweating, changes in posture, and microexpressions are all part of the body's natural response to acute social evaluation. When individuals are observed in high-stakes environments, such as interviews, public speeches, or courtroom appearances, the sympathetic nervous system activates, producing physical signs of stress that are difficult to control. In Harry's case, these responses were intensified by the dual pressures of recalling personal trauma and managing public perception. The combination of humor and vulnerability created a unique scenario. The juxtaposition forced Harry to regulate not just his thoughts and words, but his physiological responses in real time. Hasan Minhaj's awareness of these dynamics added another layer to the interaction. As an experienced host, he recognized the subtle tension building in Harry's body and strategically balanced empathy with levity. By acknowledging Harry's discomfort while simultaneously introducing humor, Hasan created a rhythm that oscillated between tension and release. This pacing allowed the audience to engage more deeply with the interview, creating emotional resonance and anticipation. The sweat, the microexpressions, the slight shifts in posture, they all became part of the narrative visual markers of the human complexity underlying Harry's experiences. Beyond the physical, this moment illuminated the mental load required to navigate public vulnerability. Harry's cognition was operating on multiple levels simultaneously, monitoring his verbal responses, controlling his expressions, interpreting Hasan's cues, and anticipating audience perception. This mental juggling act is exhausting under any circumstance. Under the intense scrutiny of millions of viewers, it becomes a profound exercise in emotional resilience. Each movement of his hands, each twitch of an eyebrow, each subtle adjustment in posture reflected the ongoing negotiation between internal reality and external expectation. The psychological interplay between humor and vulnerability was especially pronounced in this segment. Humor, by its nature, can destabilize composure, particularly when it intersects with personal experience. The TK Maxx joke was a lighthearted jab, yet it carried implications about public scrutiny, social expectation, and the commodification of personal anecdotes. Harry's physiological responses, the sweat, the microexpressions, the shifting posture, revealed the cognitive load of processing this layered social signal. It was a moment where psychology, physiology, and social dynamics converged, offering the audience an unprecedented insight into the lived experience of a public figure under stress. For viewers, the visibility of these physical cues served multiple purposes. It humanized Harry, creating empathy by illustrating that even those with wealth, privilege, and global recognition are subject to the same social anxieties and physiological responses as ordinary people. It also amplified the tension of the interview, transforming a simple exchange into a gripping study of emotional navigation. The audience could witness the unspoken struggle, the delicate dance of self-regulation, and the nuanced ways in which humans express vulnerability under observation. This interplay between visible stress and narrative content elevated the segment from mere entertainment to a psychologically rich and emotionally compelling experience. Moreover, the observation of sweating and other physiological markers underscored a broader theme of the interview: the inherent fragility of public persona. No matter how controlled a figure's outward demeanor may appear, internal emotional and physical responses are difficult to fully conceal. The interplay between internal experience and external performance is magnified exponentially in public figures, particularly those with an extensive media presence like Harry. Every gesture, every micro-expression, every bead of sweat becomes subject to analysis, interpretation, and judgment, often far removed from the original context. The audience's reactions, both in studio and online, further intensified this dynamic. Clips highlighting Harry's visible discomfort quickly circulated on social media platforms, sparking commentary, analysis, and debate. Some viewers praised his authenticity, noting that acknowledging and exhibiting natural human responses in high-pressure situations is a demonstration of courage. Others focused on humor, amplifying Hasan's comedic timing and the awkwardness of the moment. The viral potential of such segments is amplified by the visibility of physical signs like sweating, which provide tangible, relatable cues for global audiences. By the end of this chapter, the emphasis on physical signs of discomfort had achieved several narrative objectives. It allowed the audience to understand the depth of Harry's vulnerability, the challenges of public exposure, and the intricate balance between emotional expression and social expectation. The sweat, the micro-expressions, and the subtle body language were not mere embellishments. They were integral to the storytelling, providing a visceral sense of tension and engagement. Viewers were not just hearing Harry's story. They were seeing it, feeling it, and connecting with it on a deeply human level. This chapter also foreshadowed subsequent moments of heightened tension in the interview. The physical responses observed here set a pattern for how Harry would navigate humor, scrutiny, and vulnerability throughout the conversation. By analyzing the sweat, posture, and micro-expressions, the audience gained insight into the cognitive and emotional mechanisms underpinning public performance, setting the stage for a deeper exploration of emotional resilience, humor, and public perception in the chapters to follow. As the interview continued, the conversation returned to the core of Prince Harry's narrative, the revelations in his memoir, Spare. Unlike the light-hearted TK Maxx moment, this segment delved deeply into the emotional weight Harry had carried for decades, revealing the profound personal trauma that shaped both his public persona and private life. The audience could feel the shift in energy. The room seemed to contract, the lights accentuating the solemnity of his words, the cameras capturing the subtle tremors in his hands and the fleeting glances away from the host. Every detail mattered because this was not just storytelling. It was a live window into lived experience, a demonstration of courage under public scrutiny. Harry spoke candidly about his childhood, the pressures of growing up in the shadow of a global institution, and the relentless media attention that often felt intrusive and inescapable. He described moments of fear, isolation, and self-doubt, recounting experiences that were both deeply personal and publicly visible. The audience was struck by the contrast between the grandeur of royal life and the vulnerabilities he articulated. There was a poignant irony in the juxtaposition. A man surrounded by privilege yet grappling with emotional challenges so relatable to everyday viewers. This dynamic was central to the interview's power, transforming Harry from a distant public figure into a human being whose struggles resonated universally. Hasan Minhaj's approach in this segment was deliberate. He framed questions in a way that encouraged introspection while avoiding overt judgment, creating space for Harry to share without feeling cornered. The balance was delicate. The host needed to maintain engagement, yet allow for authenticity to emerge. Harry responded with a blend of eloquence and raw emotion, his words punctuated by subtle pauses, slight shifts in posture, and the occasional intake of breath, indicators of the psychological effort required to navigate such intimate disclosure in a public setting. These moments were layered, rich with meaning, and illustrative of the complexity inherent in recounting trauma under observation. One of the central themes in this segment was Harry's reflection on grief, particularly the loss of his mother, Princess Diana. The discussion went beyond public mourning to explore the private psychological toll of loss under scrutiny. Harry spoke about the challenge of processing grief in an environment where every emotional expression is amplified and judged. He described the feeling of isolation, the sense of having to perform composure for public consumption while navigating deeply personal pain. The audience, both in studio and online, could sense the authenticity in his voice, the the subtle tremors that accompanied each revelation, and the weight of experiences that had been long internalized. This was more than storytelling. It was a public reckoning with private trauma, framed through a lens of empathy, resilience, and vulnerability. The emotional intensity of the conversation was heightened by Harry's acknowledgement of his struggles with mental health. He discussed episodes of anxiety, pressure, and self-doubt, providing insight into the psychological landscape that shaped his decisions and public actions. Hasan's questions encouraged Harry to reflect on how these experiences influenced his worldview, relationships, and sense of identity. The audience witnessed the cognitive and emotional labor involved in translating internal experience into verbal narrative, a process that requires both vulnerability and self-regulation. Each word Harry spoke was laden with significance, carrying the weight of personal history while navigating the expectations of a global audience. The interplay between humor and gravity in this segment was minimal, allowing the emotional narrative to take precedence. This intentional shift highlighted the duality of the interview, moments of levity punctuated by serious reflection. By focusing on the memoir's revelations, the conversation emphasized the authenticity and courage required to confront trauma publicly. The audience was drawn into Harry's experiences, not as passive consumers of celebrity content, but as empathetic witnesses to a human struggle made visible. This created a layered viewing experience, where emotional resonance and narrative depth coexisted with subtle cues of psychological insight and social context. Harry's discussion of trauma also revealed the broader social implications of public vulnerability. By speaking openly about grief, anxiety, and personal struggle, he challenged prevailing cultural expectations around stoicism, particularly for men in positions of influence. His candidness demonstrated that vulnerability is not a weakness but a form of strength, offering viewers a model for emotional honesty and resilience. In this sense, the interview transcended entertainment, becoming a moment of cultural significance that resonated far beyond the studio walls. The audience's engagement with this segment was profound. Social media discussions reflected both admiration and empathy, with viewers expressing appreciation for Harry's willingness to expose his vulnerabilities. Analysts and commentators highlighted the psychological sophistication evident in his responses, noting the delicate balance between authenticity, self-protection, and public perception. By making his trauma visible, Harry not only shared his personal story but also contributed to a broader conversation about mental health, emotional transparency, and the pressures of public life. Physiologically, the interview's focus on trauma elicited further signs of stress and engagement. Harry's posture became slightly more rigid, his hands moving subtly to release tension. Micro-expressions, such as fleeting eye movements and the slight pursing of lips, indicated the cognitive load required to navigate both memory recall and public performance. These cues underscored the complexity of the interaction. Emotional vulnerability is not merely an internal state. It manifests physically, socially, and cognitively, creating a multidimensional experience for both the participant and the audience. Hasan's facilitation of this narrative was critical. By providing prompts that encouraged reflection without intrusion, he allowed Harry to articulate the nuances of his experiences fully. The host's ability to read microcues, adjust pacing, and balance empathy with engagement created a dynamic in which vulnerability could surface naturally. This delicate orchestration highlighted the skill required in interview settings where humor, reflection, and high-stakes public visibility intersect. As the discussion unfolded, Harry's narrative expanded to include reflections on resilience. He spoke about lessons learned from confronting adversity, the importance of seeking support, and strategies for navigating public scrutiny while maintaining personal integrity. These reflections were interwoven with storytelling that highlighted both the extraordinary and the ordinary. Moments of fear juxtaposed with moments of hope, public spectacle contrasted with private insight. The audience was given a holistic view of Harry's journey, gaining not only knowledge of his past but also a framework for understanding the psychological resilience that enabled him to navigate it. By the end of this chapter, the depth of Harry's vulnerability was fully established. Viewers had witnessed a man confronting decades of trauma in real time, negotiating the dual pressures of authenticity and public perception. The audience had engaged with the cognitive, emotional, and physiological dimensions of his experience, gaining insight into the complexity of public vulnerability. The chapter underscored the central theme of the interview. Even those with privilege and status are subject to human struggles, and the courage to share these struggles publicly creates connection, empathy, and cultural resonance. This chapter also set the stage for subsequent exploration of humor, public scrutiny, and social dynamics in later segments of the interview. By establishing the emotional gravity of Spare, viewers were primed to understand the stakes of subsequent moments, like the TK Maxx joke and other subtle jabs, within the broader context of vulnerability and resilience. The audience was now fully immersed, emotionally engaged, and ready to continue the journey through the complex landscape of Prince Harry's lived experience as revealed in the interview. The dynamics of the interview shifted yet again as Hasan Minhaj moved from reflection on trauma to the realm of humor. Humor, particularly in the context of high-profile figures like Prince Harry, is rarely neutral. It can serve as a bridge, offering relatability and levity, or it can become a weapon, highlighting vulnerabilities and triggering discomfort. In this segment, Hasan walked the fine line between empathy and subtle mockery, testing the boundaries of Harry's emotional resilience while keeping the audience engaged. It began with an innocuous question, seemingly casual in tone, about Harry's personal anecdotes in Spare. Hasan's delivery was intentionally conversational, creating a relaxed rhythm that encouraged openness.